since this kept filling on my phone, I will be making the recording here. So I have dimension of experience TI, and also the norms of it, so it's two-dimensional. I was making my example for medical labels. Like you need to have different labels on medicines and a different place on a shelf for them, so you don't like mix them up and kill your patient. Like I see that. I see that you need to have rules and orders in society to keep the flow so that it can progress and people have their placements in everyday life with different like roles and stuff, so that they are separated in that way to not be able to like cause friction, and they need their own place and like their own building, right? I see how in psychology you need labels, and like even like for like criminal justice related psychology, a forensic psych, they need labels to be able to separate conditions, so that they can have an appropriate cell placement for different inmates. Like maybe one has a developmental disability, maybe one has maybe one is a violent killer who needs to be restrained on a different floor if he gets violent, or she. Maybe one is a pedophile and needs to be in a different area. Things have their time and place. I see that, I see that, and I accept it. Like my TI is not 1D. People had misinterpreted my own self with what I had meant about, why people like, who cares about like what you type somebody, because that's different and it's more personal to the individual, and that's out of a social image lens and a CPTSD one. If somebody is so triggered by it, why do you have to like push it on them? You don't not have to do that. You can still have a type for them, but you might not even be right about their type, and pushing it on them makes no sense. Of course, people have, they have labels that will fit them, but with typology, it's a little different, where things are still in the development. It's not, a science yet. But yes, like I see how things have their time and place. And I don't fight against it. Unless maybe it has to do with putting something in a place that does not belong there, such as like putting a developmentally disabled individual who cannot work very well in a job or in a building where that's not going to suit their makeup. People would say this is like mental TI, and like any probably, their makeup, their inner makeup, their content, whatever. But like even like for like the criminal justice system, the hierarchies of that, like you need like different levels for like different tiers of like what is done as a crime, like different rules, different defined penalties, all that. Like I get it. I do not have dimension of experience TI. I just don't. Like I have I have it as one part, but it's not like my function is eliminated, like confined to that only, is what I'm trying to say. I have it as 2D. Now, if you think that I'm an IE or whatever, I'm any-ish, or maybe you think I'm EII in some models, whatever, think of subtypes and accents, and also that I'm neurodivergent. Whilst, neurodivergence would need its own separate model for some things if it really deviates off the spectrum, and the definitions cannot really capture the development very well of the individual. And neurodiversity is a spectrum, like you cannot one size neurodiversity. Like my autism might be more severe than someone else who has autism without an intellectual disability, and it might make it less applicable. This is where you divide things on subtypes to make it less restrictive, and you separate it. I would like to make my own subtypes for autism spectrum disorder, because right now it's actually too restrictive how people have autism as just like a 3-level tier. It does not capture very well what people's deficits are, or what their developmental capacity and level. It's more of a shade on a spectrum, and it has its own position and place within the spectrum.